Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where today I find myself saying or muttering under my breath, enough is enough, after scrolling down my newsfeed and seeing an increasing number of lazy articles with a header image with that robot with red eyes from the Terminator movies, and just more fear being spread about technology and robots and AI and how it's all going to destroy the planet. But of course, technology is just a mirror of ourselves. There's no such thing as bad tech or bad AI, because it's humans that have to input and determine whether that technology could make a difference in this world, solve real-world problems, or use it for power and control. Unfortunately, it's us humans that are the bad guys, not the tech. So today, I want to try and restore the balance in the universe by talking about how humans and robots can interact, what humans can learn from robots, and how the communication between man and machine has evolved, and how social robots can help with erasing unconscious bias in recruitment and beyond. Again, all started by us humans. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Sweden so I can introduce you to an incredibly cool guest waiting to share his story with us today. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yes, hi, and thanks for having me here. My name is Samer Al-Moubayed. I'm the CEO and a co-founder of a technology company called Furhat Robotics that's based in Stockholm, Sweden. I'm a serial entrepreneur, tried to build businesses in several kind of industries over the course of my life. I also have a PhD in computer science. My passion usually lies at the really intersection between software and technology and human psychology. Today I run a social robotics company that's really at trying to build machines that are supposed to interact with us in a really socially aware way, kind of really our dream of robots when we're kids. And that involves obviously a lot of human behavior and psychology work. And happy to be here and have this dialogue with you.
Excellent. And you said a lot of that came from when you was a kid there. But I'm curious, where did your interest of technology and psychology and robotics all come from? Can you remember the moment that put you on the path that you're on today?
Sure. So there's a butterfly effect there. I grew up in a very social environment. I had lots of people. Social interaction and relationships were really key kind of in my development. Then I started thinking about what I want to really do in my life when I was 18 years old, kind of choosing a field. And I was the internet was happening, and software was becoming really big, and the idea that you could build things so quickly was very fascinating. So I started doing my computer science work, but then as I was studying, AI started to become really big, and kind of AI was and is still is kind of in many ways so much about really looking at humans, trying to understand how we make decisions, but in areas where human behavior is really too complicated to really create rules. So it is very unpredictable, and that became very interesting for me of how do we understand people well enough so that we can build machines that can simulate how we behave. So even though a lot of my work is about building technology, I think the other side of that coin is really an attempt to try to understand ourselves better. So building a robot is really in many ways more of an exploration of humanity and what makes us special. And the butterfly effect really drove me more and more into building technology, but that's always been the interest was always in humans.
What a great story. And I love that fusion between humans and technology and what they can create together. And for people listening that are hearing about you and Furhat Robotics for the very first time, can you tell them a little bit more about who you are as a company and the kind of problems that you set out to solve with robotics?
As I mentioned earlier, we're the dream when we were kids of having robots that were able to talk to us, look us in the eyes, smile back to us, understand our behavior, and in a way go beyond the idea of transactions with computers, asking questions and getting answers, or controlling software, but trying to activate the social relationship that we usually we're very highly skilled and hard coded to do in our evolution as humans between each other. But when we interact with computers, we really don't activate that. So our relationship is usually very transactional, very logical. That the result of that is that humans cannot really express themselves in the depth and breadth that we get to enjoy when we interact with other people. So that's really the key for why building robots is that the user that's interacting with the robot behaves as if the robot was a human, because we're trying to simulate that as much as possible. So that's what Furhat Robotics, was born to do, trying to make that dream a reality. A lot of companies have tried that, obviously, over the last few decades, but the timing right now is very, very interesting in terms of both people starting to get used to the idea of talking to machines, with Alexa and Siri and Google Home and talking to your car. But also the technology space is, maturing in very interesting areas that allow you to build a robot that actually can have a meaningful interaction with you. So the combination of those make Furhat really potentially a viable company with the right timing. We build robots that are very customizable. They can be very human-like, or they can be very cartoonish or symbolic. The robot is mainly a robot head with a back projection inside the head that projects an animation on the face, but it creates an illusion that the face is actually moving, which allows us to build very highly expressive faces. So the robot has eyes, eyebrows, lips, and can move its head in very natural ways. It comes with very sophisticated software that allows you to both customize the personality of the robot, the voice, the age, the gender, the language it speaks, but also build conversational applications on top of it. So using speech recognition, speech synthesis, computer vision to analyze people's faces, to map the 3D environment around it. And then we collaborate with companies where we think robots can make an influence in their business. And these Furhat is kind of quite agnostic to the industry. We build the technology and then we collaborate with others to build the applications on top of the robot.
And I've got to ask, where did the name come from, Furhat Robotics? Right. It's got to be a story there, right?
Definitely, yes. Furhat is. We have an interesting blog on our website that takes you through the full version of the story. But in short, obviously we're a Swedish company where Sweden is very cold. We've the first prototype that we built for Furhat, we got invited to the London Science Museum to show it. And then we really got the first prototype that worked, the first kind of hacked prototype one day before the event in London. And we were sitting in here in Stockholm. It was December. It was a winter day. It was snowing outside. And one of the hardware, the robot was still, we didn't really have a really good design for the head, for the skull. So there were cables coming out, and we said, okay, we really need to make the robot look okay for cameras if we're going to London. So we looked around, and one of the people that in the office had forgotten their fur hat, their furry hat that you wear in the winter. So we put it on the robot. It was just the right fit. We took it to London. We started showing it, and everyone started asking us about the fur hat. And it was like, why is it wearing a fur hat? Oh, this is the Swedish robot, where it's always called that even robots need to wear a hat. And everyone started to call it the robot with the fur hat, the fur hat robot. By the time at the time we didn't really have the company yet, so it was just before starting the company. We didn't have a name. We came back here and we felt like, it is a Furhat. It's too late to change it now. Everyone, media was writing about it, and it was really too late to change the name. So it became Furhat. And then later, we obviously we felt like it's a really good alignment with the vision of the company. We, usually people identify robots as very industrial, very emotionless, very hard and metallic, and that's our kind of imagination of robots. But we're trying to build robots that are very social, and usually you identify fur or a fur hat as something that keeps you warm, something that's huggable, and so it had that kind of softness. You bring kind of that softness to robots, so it stuck. And then it's a very unique name, very different. People usually get very curious about it, so it really works in that sense also in terms of branding.
A great story. It sounds like you created a monster there. And I'm curious, as you've gone through your career, how have you seen communication between man and machine evolve? Because there's so much that's changed, hasn't there?
Absolutely. I mean, even us working in this industry, really 10 years ago, couldn't have even believed that things would be where they are today. So a lot of the technology, VR, social robots, these are things that have been part of sci-fi for a very long time. But if you look at reality, we've been interacting with computers with mainly a mouse and a keyboard. You look at a screen, you press on buttons and drop down menus, and that's our main way of interacting with computers. Very much of humans learning a new way or new interface, new device, and trying to use it. Then over time, we started seeing this smartphone that really unlocked a lot of unique ways of human interacting, mainly using your fingers and touch. So it became much more closer to feeling the level of engagement. When you're using your hands and moving very quickly on a small surface, you build much higher engagement with the computer than if you're using a big keyboard and mouse and a big screen. Then there have been few breakthroughs in speech and language technology. So we got Siri, Alexa, and Google Home really changed. At the beginning, there was a lot of skepticism of this idea. Would people really speak to a computer? Today, it feels very natural, but 10 years ago, when you told people, "Hey, we're building a robot that you can talk to," people would be very, at discomfort. Like, I'm not really going to talk to a computer. I talk to my family, and kids and friends and humans. I'm not going to talk to a box of metal, and expect it to talk back to me. So people were they didn't know how to talk to computers. Today, I would say this is a huge leap in human behavior in how we interact with computers. And obviously VR has allowed people to feel much more comfortable, being more immersed in virtual environments psychologically. Robots are obviously the next layer of that, taking the idea of immersiveness, but more on an emotional level. You can talk to a machine, but you can also smile back to it and look at it and move around it and have groups of people talking to it. So we see that, back to your question, the evolution of interacting with computers, it's moving more and more towards the human. This is what people usually do in their natural habitat, and let's try to make computers that support that, so that we can get people much more engaged with computers.
And we've all seen so many businesses that completely get it wrong, and a lot will revert back to their analog mindset and almost put in machines and robots to replace humans. But of course, that's not the way at all. The value is by working seamlessly alongside each other. That's where the real value is. But I'm curious, as someone in the industry, how do you think humans and robots should interact?
So one way to think about this, and you touched on this, that because robots talk and they look kind of a bit more, what we say, anthropomorphic or similar to a humans, then we typically very, very quickly compare them to us. It's like, oh, if this thing talks and behaves like me, that it's trying to replace me, right? That's really a lot of the things actually robots do are very similar to what other computers do, but they do it in a much better way in some areas. So we usually don't compare ourselves to an iPad, but an iPad is replacing jobs every day because it's, automating some of these things. So the way we look at a robot is we try to not really compare it to a human, but we try to compare it to other devices. So if you today go to an airport, instead of being able to talk to humans, to people, to ask for directions or help, you have these, big touch screens and, mainly screens that you have to very quickly learn how to use. We're removing people, we're removing humanity, and we're creating really bad user experiences because we're prioritizing using, suboptimal interfaces like a big touch screen in a shopping mall or in an airport, in recruitment, for example. We're using forms and online and questionnaires instead of having a human to human interaction. So when we think of robots, we don't think of this is actually replacing humans, and we rather try to see, okay, where did we end up using technology and that affected the user experience, because it's, there's no emotion, there's no language interaction, there's no social interaction, then try to put a robot there to empower the user. And that's a very healthy way of looking at this technology, because it's an easy trap to fall into. This looks like a human, then it's trying to compete with humans. But we already have so much more potential just by replacing bad technologies that we've deployed in society already.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think often we should look at, I think so many people are living robotic lifestyles, doing repetitive, mundane tasks. I think it's actually an opportunity to free people from that. And letting the machines do the best of what they're good at, and people doing the best at what they're good at. But is there anything humans can learn from robots, do you think?
We have a group of types of applications that we build where we use the robot to train people on social interaction. So, a robot, for example, we have an application within sales where the robot is trying to teach a sales agent on how to interact with different types of customers. So today, when in a call center or you meet a service agent, typically, if there is a conflict, the user is really scared because sales agents are not always trained to resolve conflict. So their emotions get in the way. If they're hungry, that affects the interaction. And so we're building with few different partners applications where the robot is trying to simulate a human to train people on how to interact with the humans. So the robot can be very angry at you, or it can be very sad, or can withdraw, to try to amplify, how humans can feel, and try to train other people so that if you practice with a robot, when you're actually faced in the real world with a real human, you have experienced that kind of emotional situation, and then you can really be better interacting with humans. So that's, I would say, has been really interesting and surprising that we can use robots to really amplify, train people how to be better humans than to replace their jobs in a way.
I love that. And on the subject of being better humans, how do you think social robots can help with erasing unconscious bias in recruitment and beyond? Because again, that is a huge topic at the moment, and something that a lot of people are guilty of unconsciously putting it into AI algorithms, and then we have a whole mess on our hands. But how do you think social robots can improve that?
Yeah, there is a big collaboration where an application we're building with a large recruitment company, mainly with this hypothesis that humans are biased, right? So in general, we have a ton of subconscious biases. From the very small things like if you're talking to someone your age or with a similar background, you're likely to give them better chances to connect with you than other people. Even though it's consciously we don't really see that, but subconsciously that's always there. Down to if you're hungry and you're joining a recruitment interview, you're really you can get very easily triggered and not really empower the candidate in a job interview to express themselves. Typically, when we're building AI, we're recording human behavior that is already biased and then putting it in the machine. So we're transferring these biases to the machine, and then that, as you mentioned, creates a lot of these conversations about are we, how can we get data that is unbiased? But that is always very difficult, specifically in a job interview. Typically statistically speaking, a job interview, the outcome of that interview is decided within 7 seconds of the interview because of the biases that were set in the beginning. So, if you meet someone, depending on how they're dressed, the accent they have, their hair color, and all of these things affect that, and the results of that bias in the beginning, flows through the whole interaction, the whole interview, and decides the outcome in much of a subconscious way. So what is really powerful about robots, social robots, is that they are still human-like. They allow the candidate to express themselves, speak. You can show their personality, but the robot can also ignore a lot of the things that people are very sensitive to. So the robot can consciously say, I'm not going to take how they look into account. I'm not going to look into how they're dressed, how tall they are, their accents. And also the robot can behave exactly the same way with all candidates. So if you're recruiting for a job, you're meeting 20 people as a human recruiter, you're likely going to interact differently with each of them, right? Because you're, depending on their personality and a lot of factors that really are detrimental to the outcome of the interview, you're going to change your behavior. A robot can be still very human-like, empowering to the candidate, but can behave in exactly the same way with all of them. So giving them all an equal opportunity. And that's where we think this is a really interesting use case that, in today, the recruitment industry, you can, either meet a human or you can go to a web page and fill forms. When you fill forms, you can't really express yourself very well. But when you meet a human, you have the human bias. So a robot can really bridge these two together.
And I would imagine someone working in the heart of the industry here, when you see so many different blog posts and newspaper articles with those dreaded robots with the red eyes from a Terminator movie, must really frustrate the hell out of you. So I've got to ask, are there any myths around robots that you'd like to finally lay to rest today?
Yeah, definitely what you just touched on, that there is so much really baggage that we're carrying from, that or prejudice on what robots are good for. So as you said, we compare them to humans. They're trying to take our jobs, but we rarely compare them to other computers and say, wow, if instead of pressing buttons and filling forms, now I can talk to a computer. So that's something I would really love for us to change in how we look at robotics, is trying to see how they empower people so that people can behave the way they were programmed to do. And then really go back to our childhood. That's how I started this, is instead of thinking about the Terminator and what, the games and the movie industry has portrayed in what robots are, kids usually don't have that same relationship to robots. When you talk to kids about robots, they, their eyes start to glow and they get very excited, because their idea of them is that, these are friends. These are a very evolved toys that they can become friends with and have a relationship with and discuss their problems with. And that's, I think, the vision of what robots are, they empower you socially. They don't, threaten your life and take over your job.
And looking towards the future, is there anything that particularly excites you about the future of the robotics and where we're heading?
Yeah, so the whole industry is, usually I say, social robots today are where smartphones were in the late 90s. We're at the beginning of, we're starting to scratch the surface on how big the impact of building a social interface is. And then today we're really exploring very early concepts, but we see that they're going to be, similar to how the smartphone has an app store where you have tens of thousands of applications built by other people. On top of it, we see robots really taking a similar path where you're going to have a robot, but it can do thousands of different things. We're at the beginning of that now. So we're starting to see the really early applications of where we see a good fit between the technologies, what it can and can't do, and the market and the user value. So, we are at the beginning. So the next, 10 years are going to be very exciting. It's going to be very interesting to see which, applications work and in what order, and what kind of customer groups the robots will work for. Is it going to be kids? Is it going to be the elderly? Are we going to see them in airports? But, fast forward 20 years, it's very likely that robots are going to be everywhere. And then we're going to look much less on our screens and type on our keyboards, but, interact with robots like we're interacting with humans. So that makes me very excited.
So this is the part of the podcast where I usually ask the guest, what is a particular song that has inspired you on your career in technology? Something that means a lot to your team? Or what inspires you to get out of bed in the morning, go on your morning run, or even go onto stage and deliver that keynote speech? But today, rather than ask you, I'm going to try and mix things up a little bit and ask that you bring one of your robots on to answer the question. So my question is, what would your song be that encompasses everything that you do at Furhat, and why?
Oh, my favorite song. That's a great question. There is a Swedish song with the title, Home is Where I Put My Hat. And since I am Swedish, and I want people to feel at home with me, I would say this is my favorite song. But I would of course prefer it the song was called, Home is Where I Put My Fur Hat.
I absolutely love that. First class answer as well. I'll add that song to the Spotify playlist. Anyone that's on Spotify, go to Spotify and search for Tech Talks Daily. And under playlists, you should find a list of all the songs that the guests choose. And today, of course, a robot, which is incredibly cool. Can you remind the listeners of where they can find you online and contact your team if they've got any questions?
Absolutely. So you can find us on furhatrobotics.com. And there you can see videos of the robot. You can interact with our support and sales team. And then you can also explore our tutorials and videos just to get a better, idea of what Furhat can do today.
Excellent. Well, I'll add all those links to the show notes where people can find you nice and easily. I've loved chatting with you today and one of your robots at Furhat Robotics. But more than anything, just thank you for sharing your story with me.
Thanks for having me.
I would just love to hear more stories like this that show the difference that we can make in this world by working alongside technology, rather than trying to compete against it all the time. What is it with our obsession of working from home versus working in the office? AI versus humans, robots versus humans. The real magic happens when we seamlessly work alongside each other. Let machines focus on what they're best at doing and let humans focus on what they're best at doing. And together, we can move faster and farther than ever before. I am a bit of a dreamer. But you know the drill by now. It's time for you to flood my inbox with your messages, thoughts and questions. And a big hello to Eric in California, by the way, who emailed in asking if I have a podcast team producing the show and how do I cope running a daily podcast. Well, Eric, I'm a big believer in just keeping things simple, and everything you see and hear is all me. There is no team. So from the emails, direct messages you send in, and I just simply hop on a Zoom call each day with a guest, record the call, upload it to my podcast host, and send it to you all. And I do hear a lot of people who struggle to get content out because they obsess over ensuring everything is 100% perfect, removing every and but that's just not real life and a real conversation, is it? Simply recording a conversation and sharing it, it can be as simple as that. So please, keep those questions coming in. So a big thank you to Eric for that. My email address, as you should know by now, is techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk. Keep those questions coming in, and I will ensure there is another podcast waiting for you tomorrow. So a big thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.